Well, I'm going to jump right into it today. We're in this series called Joyful. We're looking at different characteristics, different character traits that we need to develop, different activities we need to put into our lives so that we can have the joy that God wants us to have. Last week we looked at a life of connection. Being connected to Christ and to one another is vitally important to having the joy in our lives that God wants us to have. But it's also vitally important for us to be able to encourage others so they can have the joy that God wants them to have. So we all play a part in that and God's plan for our lives. Today we're looking at a different category, a different attribute, a different thing we need to grasp and understand for us to have a joyful life. Today's message is called A Life of Purpose. So I want to jump right in here with number one on your outline. What is the purpose of your life? Before you write down what it is, what you think it is, I just want you to stop for a minute, really think through how you would word that answer. What would you say if you had to write it down on paper today? And I do want you to write down on your notes, what do you believe is the purpose for your life? It's a simple question, but it's not an easy one, is it? When you have to actually identify it and write it down. Maybe you're thinking, I kind of know what it is, but I'm not sure how to say it. I'm not sure how to word it. So we're going to try to get more precise on this today. We're going to try to get laser focused on what the purpose of our life really is. Because if we're going to have the joy that God wants us to have, part of being able to live with joy is living in the purpose that God has for us. When you're constantly wandering around not knowing your purpose, or when you're constantly misunderstanding what your purpose is, it will lead you down a path that will rob you of some of the joy that God wanted you to experience in your life. So we need to get focused again. I'm always a little surprised. I ask people a lot of times when they come to me and they want to talk to me about struggles or something, challenges that they're going through or opportunities, and they're not sure which way to turn or what decision to make. A lot of times I'll ask them, well, what do you think your purpose is? Because that will determine a lot about how you need to respond to this challenge or this opportunity that you're facing in life. If you can identify your purpose, it helps give you focus in life, and that helps you have the joy that God wants you to have. So get the answer in your head, and then I want you to write it down in your notes. How would you finish this sentence? I am living for blank. Fill in the blank. I, right now, am living for blank. Whatever it is for you right now, just put it in writing. It helps to write it down. It helps to see it. That you know in your mind, in your heart, you feel like that is your purpose. Now, Paul is going to talk to us as we go through this book of Philippians, this letter that he wrote to the church there. He's going to talk to us as we study the second half of chapter 1 today. We looked at the first half last week. Today we're going to look at the second half of chapter 1. If you want to go ahead and turn there in your Bible, pull it up on your tablet or your phone there in Philippians chapter 1. He's going to talk to us about what the purpose of life really is. But in order to really appreciate and understand what Paul is saying, you need to have a little context to what he's saying. So I want to rewind a little bit, go back about 5 years in Paul's life to set the stage for what he's telling us here in the second half of chapter 1. I want us to see what's been happening in Paul's life. Because here's the thing, I want you to know, if my life had been going the way Paul's life was going, I would be questioning God about what the purpose of my life really is. I would be challenging God probably, saying, God, this can't possibly be what you want for me, what you want for my life. Have any of you felt that way occasionally with things that were going on in your life? God, I don't know why in the world you would allow this to happen. This can't be in your will for me, for this to have happened to me. I think sometimes we get confused about that, and that God maybe has messed up somewhere along the way with us. So here's what's happening with Paul. 5 years earlier, he was worshiping in the temple in Jerusalem. He had some friends with him, a lot like us here today, in the room today, in this auditorium. You're here worshiping God. Well, there were some Jews outside the inner courts of the temple who were trying to attack Paul and accuse Paul, and they saw this as an opportunity to take him and do harm to him. So they come inside, and this angry mob rushes the temple where Paul is, and they grab Paul and they drag him outside the temple, and they proceed to beat him to death. I mean, what's he doing? he's in there worshiping God. You would think, well, God, I thought that was my purpose. And then this happens, right? They come drag me out, and they start beating me up. And they wanted to kill Paul. They wanted to, that was their intent, was to beat him to death there. Now, I think if it were me, about this time I would be saying to God, God, what is the purpose of this? Why in the world would you let this happen to me? I mean, I'm just here trying to worship you. I'm just trying to honor you with my life. I'm just trying to do what you told me to do and called me to do, Father. So why would you let something like this happen to me? And I'd be saying something like this. I thought you wanted me, God, to be healthy and safe. I mean, a lot of people think that's their purpose in life, right? To try to stay healthy and safe. There's nothing wrong with being healthy. Nothing wrong with being safe. But that wasn't Paul's purpose in life, to be healthy and safe. Maybe it's not yours either. Maybe it's not mine. Maybe that's not God's purpose for your life or my life. A lot of people would say it is, but that wasn't Paul's purpose. We know that. Well, the Roman commander learns about what's happening out there. You see, the Roman government had it set up where they had representatives in all the major cities. And here is Paul in a major city, and he's being dragged out and beaten out there in public. So the Roman commander brings some guards with him, and he goes out and he rescues Paul, so he's not actually killed out there. But he's pretty bloodied up and beaten up. At least he's breathing, he's alive. But the commander assumes that Paul must be guilty of something really bad, or these people would not have done this to him. So they take him as a prisoner. They arrest him right there on site, beaten and bloodied like he was. They take him and take him to prison to interrogate him. But they're not going to be one of these nice authorities in prison asking him questions to find out what was going on. They were going to interrogate him kind of Jack Bauer style. You know what I'm saying? They're going to put the pressure on him. They're going to beat him. So they take him, and they're stringing him up because they're about to beat him with lashes again. Now, he's been through that before. He's thinking it might be happening again. But Paul, just before they strike the first blow, Paul says, hey, guys, maybe you didn't realize this. You probably didn't. I didn't think, though, it was okay for you to beat a Roman citizen who hasn't been charged of any crime. You see, Paul had Roman citizenship. Now, he was, before that, a Jew, but he was a Jew who had Roman citizenship. So he has kind of both sides, great lineage on both sides in the Jewish faith and as a Roman citizen. He's got great lineage on both sides. And now he could call on his lineage as a Roman citizen and the benefits that brought because it was against the law for Roman soldiers, Roman guards, Roman authorities to beat a Roman citizen unless they've already been found guilty in court of a crime that they said that was the punishment for. So immediately when the Roman commander finds out that Paul is a Roman citizen, he's not sure what to do. He's arrested a Roman citizen that really hasn't been charged with anything, but he can't set him free either because there's a Jewish mob out there that wants to have him beaten. And part of what the Roman commander's job was to keep peace in these territories that they were ruling over. So he didn't want to send Paul back out there. He knew that wouldn't be a peaceful thing if he did that. But he also couldn't beat Paul in prison there because he was a Roman citizen. So he's left with kind of a dilemma there. What is he going to do with the Apostle Paul? Well, what he decides to do is in the middle of the night, he takes Paul and he sends him with a huge guard unit because he doesn't want anything to happen because it'll look bad on him. And he sends Paul to the city of Caesarea. That's about 50 miles away. He basically sends a note with Paul that says this: I found this Roman citizen. He was about to be killed by the Jews, and I rescued him. Right? He wants to make himself look good to the other Roman authorities there. And so he sends him over to Caesarea, and he says, I thought it was best to send him to you, and I told his accusers to bring their case to you, O great Felix. You see, Felix was the ruler of that area, and he's in Caesarea. So the local Roman authority thinks, well, the way I could get this off my hands and make myself look good is to send it on over to Caesarea and let Felix handle this. That gets it out of my hands now. And let him go deal with all the complexities that come with trying to arrest a Roman citizen who has not been charged yet. So, the next day, Paul's accusers come and they bring their charges to Felix against Paul. And the governor starts to realize that Paul is not your average, ordinary citizen. Felix finds out a little bit more about Paul, and he finds out that Paul has a lot of enemies, but he also has a lot of friends. Friends in high places, so to speak. And so he wants to be very delicate about how he handles this case with Paul. So here's what he does. He just listens to the accusations, and he just keeps Paul in prison, and he never does anything else. He keeps him there for 2 years. He never charges him with anything. He just holds him. All right? Now, one reason they would do that in that culture was it was very much a corrupt system. Not ours, it wasn't like ours. But their system was a little corrupt. And the governor was probably hoping, because Paul had connections, that maybe some of his friends would bring them a bribe to get Paul out of prison. They can make a little money off this deal. So he just keeps holding Paul, hoping somebody will come bail him out, right? Somebody will come spend the money to get Paul out of prison, and they could get a little money out of this and come out better on the other side. But nobody comes and bails him out. The governor's waiting, but Paul doesn't get released. Now, if it were me, and I were sitting in prison for 2 years without any charges against me, unjustly held for 2 years, I would say to God, well, God, what's the purpose of this? Why in the world would you let me have to go through this? I was just honoring you, preaching your word, sharing the gospel, and now I am unjustly sitting in prison. 2 years of my life are being wasted away in prison. God, what's the purpose of this? I thought you wanted my life to be comfortable and secure. Isn't that what a lot of us think the purpose of our life is? I mean, that's what we're working for. That's what we're all striving for, to get to that place where we can be comfortable and secure. Is that the purpose of your life? Do you think that's what God says is the purpose of our lives? To be comfortable and secure? It wasn't Paul's purpose. That's not what God wanted for his life, and he's allowing it to be quite different than that. So 2 years come and go, and Felix is no longer the governor. A new governor comes in. He assesses the situation. He decides the best thing to do with Paul is to send him back to Jerusalem, where all this got started. And that's where he thinks it can end. They'll just take care of it there, is to have a trial in Jerusalem. Now, that wouldn't be good news for Paul, because he knows in Jerusalem there's only one outcome that's going to happen. It's a one-way ticket to his probably being beaten, maybe killed, if he goes back to Jerusalem. So he knows that's not the best thing for him. So he plays what is basically his last card as a Roman citizen. He appeals to Caesar. That's kind of like today appealing to the Supreme Court, right? It was their highest court to actually, now only a Roman citizen could appeal to Caesar. A non-Roman citizen didn't have that privilege. But in that government structure, if you had Roman citizenship and you felt like you'd gone through all the processes and it hadn't been resolved the way it needed to be, as a last resort, you could appeal to Caesar. And then it was up to Caesar to decide if he would hear your case or not. But they would at least take you to go before Caesar to see if he would hear your case if you were a Roman citizen appealing to Caesar. So this governor sets Paul and some other prisoners on a ship, and he sets sail for Rome, because that's where he has to go to have his case heard by Caesar. But out there on the open sea, a storm blows in. When you think it just couldn't get any worse, the ship goes up against some rocks and crashes out at sea. They wash up on shore of this island out there on their way to Rome. Barely survive, but he does survived the shipwreck, and he ends up there on that island. Now, they have to wait on that island for a while, because it takes a little while for word to get out that the ship hasn't made it to Rome. So here he is, shipwrecked with other prisoners and guards there on this island where he doesn't have any kind of a good life at all. And he has to wait until a rescue ship comes along, and they get Paul and the other prisoners, and they go to Rome. Now, when they get to Rome, he's put under arrest there. And he's chained to a guard 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in Rome. He doesn't have his freedom, can't go and come like he wants to. He's got a guard right there with him all the time. And here's the thing. While he's in Rome, he's just waiting. He still doesn't know how it's all going to turn out. He still doesn't know what the verdict is going to be. In fact, appealing to Caesar was very risky. Because if you went before Caesar and he just happened to be in a bad mood that day, he could have you executed right there on the spot. Paul doesn't know if he's going to live or die, even if he does get an audience with Caesar. So, for a couple of years, he's chained up there in Rome. And if it were me, I'd be saying to God, well, what's the purpose of this now, God? Why did you bring me all the way here to Rome to be chained to a guard for 2 years, not even knowing if when I do get to see Caesar, if I ever do, he might have me executed anyway? God, could that possibly be what you want? I mean, I thought you wanted me to be prosperous and blessed, right? Isn't that what a lot of us think? Has to be God's purpose for our lives, that we be prosperous and we be blessed the way we think we ought to be blessed? But that wasn't the purpose of Paul's life. That's not what God wanted for him. Paul had wanted to go to Rome ever since he had converted to Christianity. But you know what he pictured most likely? We don't know for sure, but from what he said about this, we can kind of have some conjecture here about it. I think Paul pictured that he would go to Rome and speak at a packed Colosseum and bring thousands of people to Christ. I mean, can't you just see that? Wouldn't that be, in our scenario, how it ought to work out for the great Apostle Paul? That he has this great crusade. He sends people in there in advance, and they invite everybody to come, and they get this big crowd to come to the Colosseum, and they have billboards out, Paul speaking this week at the Colosseum. Everybody come, and they bring in the best praise band they can get and all of that, and they set it up for this huge, huge rally they're going to have for Christ at the Colosseum in Rome. And maybe that's how Paul had pictured his trip to Rome turning out. And instead, when he gets to Rome, he's chained to a guard, and he's in prison for 2 years, and he doesn't know if he's going to be executed or let to go on with his life. I would be questioning God, wouldn't you? God, is this really the purpose you have for me? I mean, if I could have been preaching in the Colosseum, we could have been bringing thousands of people to Christ, right? But what Paul doesn't realize, I'm sure at the moment, hindsight would have allowed him to see more of this. What he didn't realize is this: God was using this. While he was in prison in Rome, he was writing a good portion of what we now know as the New Testament in the Bible. What we call the section of the New Testament called the prison epistles. Paul wrote some of that for those 2 years that he was in prison in Rome. And he didn't just get to preach to thousands through writing those letters. He writes to this church in Philippi. He writes letters to other churches along the way. And throughout the ages, ever since that happened now, Paul has been able to reach millions upon millions for Christ. You see how God used this? In a totally different way than Paul could have ever imagined. Had Paul's plan been carried out, he might have reached hundreds or maybe thousands for Christ. But with God's plan and purpose at work, he's reached millions upon millions for Christ. Sometimes we misread our purpose, don't we? We misunderstand. And we get angry at God, and we resent God allowing the bad stuff in our lives, the things that aren't going the way we thought they ought to go. And we don't even realize maybe God is using that. So he writes to the church in Philippi while he's there. And one reason he says, remember last week's memory verse? Anybody remember what it is? What is it, Mary? There you go. Philippians 1:3. I thank my God every time I remember you. He starts out with this letter to the church at Philippi saying, I thank my God every time I remember you. One thing that happened while he was in prison in Rome is the Philippian church had taken up an offering to help Paul with some of the expenses. Even though he was a prisoner, they didn't take care of his basic needs. Other people had to do that. He had to pay for the stuff, the personal stuff that he needed, the personal items that he needed. So the church in Philippi is helping Paul even while he's in prison. And he says, oh, I thank God every time I think about you guys and how much you love me and care for me and want to help me even in this situation. Then he goes on to explain that God is still at work, even though it doesn't seem like it. You see, Paul's purpose in life was not to be comfortable or secure. It wasn't to be prosperous and wealthy. It wasn't to be carefree or live an easy life. His purpose in life is captured in the 21st verse of chapter 1. Let's look at it together. He says this. This is going to be our memory verse for this week. Philippians 1:21. For me to live is Christ, to die is gain. We'll put it up here. Everybody look at it. Let's say it out loud together. This is our memory verse this week, Philippians 1:21. Let's say it. I'm going to give you the signal this time, all right? All together when my arms drop. For me to live is Christ, to die is gain. Where is it found? There you go. I want that to be your memory verse for this week. Because, friends, that's the laser-sharp focus of the purpose of life. To live is Christ. To die is gain. If you are going to be a Christ follower on this earth, then there's a lot of other things God might want you to do, but it's all under the umbrella of this laser-focused purpose for your life. For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. Maybe you wrote that when I asked you to write what your purpose was. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you were thinking something similar, but it wasn't quite as laser-focused as that. I think that one of the reasons Christians get frustrated in this world, and myself included, and sometimes we get discouraged, is because we forget the laser-focused purpose we're supposed to have for being here. For you to live, for me to live, should be for Christ. Period. And if we live for Christ, then even to die is what? Gain. So no matter what happens, even to the point of death, our purpose is fulfilled when we live for Christ. When Paul talks about the purpose of his life, I want you to notice that the focus is not on what the purpose is, the focus is on who the purpose is. Right? Let's stop focusing on the what. Let's get back to focusing on the who. Who are we living for? Who is our life really all about? It's not all about us. Never has been. Never should have been. It's all about Him. That's the purpose. So that's the deeper question. Who is the purpose of life? And the answer is it's supposed to be Jesus. But a lot of people in the world will say the purpose of my life is me. It's for me to be blessed. It's for me to be happy. It's for me to be wealthy. It's for me to be comfortable. It's for me to be secure. But joyful living means that we're not living for ourselves anymore. But that our purpose, the purpose of our lives is Jesus Christ Himself. When you read this chapter, I want you to look at verse 12 in particular. In verse 12, Paul says this. Now, I want you to know, brothers, he's saying, I want to be especially clear about something here. You think it would go this way, but actually just the opposite has happened. You would think that Paul, being in prison, this great orator, this great communicator, the worst thing that could have happened to him would be to be in prison. But he says, I want you to know, brothers, I want to make this clear, how God has used this. Look at verse 12. I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. The gospel is the good news of Jesus Christ, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. The gospel is all about Jesus. And he says, I want you to know that everything that's gone wrong here in my eyes, God has used to do the most important thing that needed to be done with my life, which was to advance the gospel of Jesus Christ. That was more important than anything else. Than me being safe, than me being comfortable, than me being wealthy. Advancing the gospel of Christ takes priority over all of those things. That's why here at Lakeshore, the primary purpose of this church is to connect people to Christ and to each other, and then to grow them to maturity in Christ, and then to serve people in the name of Christ, because all of those three things advance the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's what we have to stay laser focused on as a church. If we get off on anything else, we're going to miss the purpose. We're going to miss fulfilling what God wants to do in us and through us. When I say the purpose of this church, who am I talking about? Us. We are the church. We need to get laser focused on connecting people to Christ and each other, helping them grow up and mature in Christ, and then serving people in the name of Christ. That should be the laser focused purpose of our lives. But I want to be candid with you. There's one specific area for the church in America that I'm really concerned about more than ever right now. And we do pretty good with it here at Lakeshore, but we could sure do better, and we need to get more laser focused on this. I'm concerned nationwide about how the gospel is being advanced to the next generation coming behind us. I'm really concerned about that. When you look at the statistics, when you look at what's happening to churches all across America, the truth is we cannot afford to not get back as a church to being laser focused on reaching the next generation for Christ, because we are losing ground at a high rate here in America. The truth is, it's possible 50 or 60 years from now for this building to be totally empty every week, and church buildings all around our country. If you've visited Europe, if any of you have had a chance to do that, one of the things a lot of people do in Europe is they now pay money to go tour the great cathedrals in Europe. You know why they can do that? Because most of them are empty on Sundays. They're beautiful, beautiful architecture, beautiful buildings, millions of dollars spent on those buildings. And for years, they brought people to Christ. They used those buildings as a tool for the advancement of the gospel. And today, they are tourist attractions that are empty on Sundays. You say, yeah, that's Europe. Well, the same trend that happened in Europe over 100 years ago is happening in America today. They failed to advance the gospel to the generations that were coming behind them. They got inward focused. They got focused on protecting themselves and their traditions and doing things the way they wanted to do them and having it all done the way they were comfortable with, and it stopped reaching the generations that were coming after them. And the church went into decline until many of them died out completely. Friends, it's happening in America. And part of the reason it's happening is because we've lost our focus. We started focusing on ourselves in the church in America. We started focusing on our wants, our desires, our preferences, instead of reaching the lost that are coming behind us. Making sure the generations after us have their own faith in Christ. The vice president of the Southern Baptist Convention, in a report to their executive committee last year, said this: "We're losing our children. Research indicates that 70% of teens who are involved in a church group will stop coming to church within 2 years after their high school graduation." Their statistics say 70% of their Southern Baptist teens will not be in church 2 years after they graduate from high school, even teens that were actively involved in their youth programs at their churches. Now, even if that's just half true, even if the statistics aren't exactly right, but even half that many aren't staying in their walk with Christ, that's critical mass, people. That's huge 20 years down the road, 30 years down the road, when they're getting married and they're having kids and they're raising their children, and church is not a part of their lives at all. Christianity is not important to them. It's vital that we as a church today get laser focused on advancing the gospel to the generations that are coming behind us. Preferences are going to have to be set aside, and we cannot make excuses. Sacrifices are going to have to be made. Whatever it takes, we better get focused on this as a church. We better do whatever it takes to reach the generations coming behind us, or we will see the same results, or maybe worse, than what we've seen in the European countries that are not Christian in any way, shape, or form anymore in our world today. Now, I'm thankful there is a little bit of a revival happening in some spots in Europe today. But friends, they lost so much ground before they woke up and realized what they needed to do. Let's not be guilty of that here in America. Let's make sure we get our selfish desires out of the way, and we do whatever it takes to reach the young people and keep them in Christ. I've noticed that when I talk about this a lot of adults say, well, what we got to do is just teach them to accept our ways. That's the way we're going to reach. That's the way we'll keep them. Well, that hasn't been working. Hasn't been working for a long time now. So if that's not working, then maybe we're the problem. Maybe we're the ones that need to change, not ask them to change for us. I know nobody likes to be uncomfortable. I don't like to be uncomfortable. Nobody does. But friends, we've got to be willing to be uncomfortable for Christ if it means it helps us reach and keep the next generation coming behind us. So, the first thing we've got to do is realize, number one is, we have to understand what the purpose of life is, and the purpose is to advance the gospel of Jesus Christ. There's no doubt that that's what God wants our lives to be about. The second thing I want to ask you is this. Do you feel chained to something that you think is keeping you from fulfilling your purpose? Do you feel chained? You see, there's this inconsistency we have. We say, well, we want to reach the world for Christ. We want to reach the young people for Christ. We want them to come to know Jesus and have Jesus as the Lord of their lives. We say that, but what's keeping us from doing it? Are we chained to anything that's keeping us from fulfilling that purpose? Because it seems inconsistent that we say that's the purpose, but we're not really accomplishing that very well in the world today, are we? So is there some excuse that we're making about why we're not able to do that? Look at verses 13 and 14 of chapter 1. Paul says this, talking about being in prison and being chained to a guard. He says, as a result, it's become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. Because of my chains, most of the brothers in the Lord have been encouraged to speak the word of God more courageously and fearlessly. So what Paul is saying is because of the situation he finds himself in, actually God's word is being advanced because of that. Even though it looked bad and looking at it from the outside, even though it looked like it couldn't possibly be God's will for their life, for his life, God was using it to advance the cause of the gospel. Here's what's happening. He's chained, maybe a 3 or 4 foot chain to a guard for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And about every 6 to 8 hours, they change guards. So about every 6 to 8 hours, Paul's got somebody new chained to him. And I can't help but think of how Paul would smile every time the guard was changed out. You know what? I got a new guy to talk to now about the gospel of Jesus Christ. I've got a new guy to be an example to. I've got a new guy to be a witness to. One commentator put it this way. Paul wasn't chained to them. They were chained to him. I like that. You see, here's what you need to know about that Roman guard that Paul was chained to. They were the elite of the Roman military. And they were being groomed to be leaders in the Roman government. After they transitioned out of that military position, they would be leaders in the Roman government. So what God has done for Paul is he's brought in these younger guards who are being groomed for leadership in that nation, and he's given him a one-on-one audience with every one of them that come in and get chained to him. He's in prison chained to a guard, but he's going to be able to influence and impact the Roman Empire through being chained to those guards. And every 6 to 8 hours, he gets a new one to work on. He gets a new one to talk about Jesus to. And when he's chained to them, I can see him just smiling and thinking, what a great opportunity. God just gave me another one that I can talk to about the gospel. The one thing we would think would keep us from fulfilling our purpose is the one thing God was using to fulfill a greater purpose. So here's my question for you. Do you find yourself chained to something that you think is keeping you from fulfilling your purpose? Maybe you think, it's my job. Oh, I could do more for Christ, but you don't know where I work. It's a bad place. I've got these other employees that aren't what they ought to be, and my boss is terrible. And you're thinking about how bad conditions are at your job for you being a Christian, and how you don't know, you can't believe God would actually want you to be there as a Christian, right? I've heard people complain like that in the church. How much worse could it be than a prison cell chained to a guard? But that was exactly where God wanted Paul to be. Maybe that dead-end job you've got in that terrible environment is exactly where God put you on purpose, to advance the cause of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Maybe you need to understand that's the mission field God just placed you on purpose, for His glory, for His honor. Maybe God's got you in that place with those people to accomplish His purpose through you. Just maybe. Maybe you find yourself chained in a bad marriage and you think, well, yeah, my marriage is not what it ought to be. I'm married to somebody I just don't love anymore or don't respect, or maybe they don't love me or respect me anymore, and God couldn't possibly want this for me, because after all, the purpose is He wants me to be happy, right? He wants me to be enjoying life, right? That's what God wants for me. He couldn't possibly want me in this bad marriage, could He? Well, maybe, just maybe, God is more interested in making you holy than He is in making you happy. Just maybe He's got you there on purpose. Not just to be a witness to the spouse, but to grow you up in your holiness in your walk with Him. Maybe you feel chained to a terrible neighbor in your neighborhood. You just pray that next time you come home from church, there's going to be a for sale sign in his yard, right? I mean, this is the neighbor that beats all other neighbors. It's just the worst neighbor in the world. And you're thinking, God surely wouldn't want me here, right? He surely doesn't want me to have a neighbor like that. You think about it midnight, sneaking out and putting the for sale sign out there yourself. I've been there. It's tempting. And some of you actually think the only answer to this, it's got to be God's will for me to sell my house and move to another neighborhood. That's the answer. That's what God, after all, He wants me to be happy and safe and secure, right? He doesn't want me living next to that neighbor. You ever thought that maybe that's who He chained you to so you could be a witness to them? So you could be the example to them of what a Christian neighbor is supposed to be like, even when they aren't being what they ought to be? You think that could maybe be God's purpose for you in that neighborhood? Maybe you feel like you're chained to a rebellious child or a broken down car or a house that won't sell that you're trying to sell. And you're thinking, why is this happening to me? You want me to be comfortable. You want me to be prosperous, don't you, God? You want me to be happy, don't you, God? Why would you keep me in this situation? Maybe you're chained to a broken down body. Can any of you relate to that? Yeah. You're thinking, God, why wouldn't you give me better health and I could do more for you? I could be a better witness for you, right? You remember the Apostle Paul thought that for a little while. He had this thorn in the flesh. We're not sure what it was, but he asked God to take it away. And 3 times God said, no, I can use you better with that than I could without that. My strength is going to be more clearly seen through your weaknesses. Do you think even that might be one way God has put you in a place for His purposes to advance the gospel of Jesus Christ? Even through the pain and suffering you might have to go through because of it? I was reading this week as I was preparing this message about Handel, who wrote The Messiah. It was one of his most famous works. When he wrote what we know as Handel's Messiah, here's what I found out about his life. It was anything but good when he wrote that. His health and his finances were at a breaking point. The right side of his body was paralyzed. His money was gone completely. He was in debt. He was threatened with imprisonment. And that's exactly when he sat down and wrote the words to the Messiah. He probably never would have written those words had he not been in that place in his life where he had to call on God and dig deep in his relationship with God. And he ended up writing his most famous, most impactful work of all the music he ever wrote. Maybe God has you in this place at this time to accomplish His purpose of bringing glory to Him and advancing the gospel. That's why I'm saying, don't assume that because you were cut from the team or because you're not making good grades in school or because you got dumped by your first love, don't assume that God isn't at work in that. Don't assume that because you were transferred here against your will or your child was diagnosed with some illness that you never wished upon your child or if your business is going under, don't assume that God isn't able to work through those things both to help you accomplish what He wants you to do in life and to advance the gospel of Jesus Christ. He can use any and all of those things and anything else you could name for a greater purpose, for a greater good than any of us could ever imagine. Do you ever wonder what kind of influence Chuck Colson would have had if he had never been found guilty and put in prison? He established one of the most effective, impactful prison ministries in the history of our country. But he had to go through a lot of bad stuff to get to that place. What about Johnny Erickson Tata? You may have heard of her. She had a diving accident that paralyzed her. But she became a greater witness for Christ and had more opportunities to represent Him after the accident than she had ever had before the accident. What about Corrie ten Boom and the impact and influence she's had on this world? If she had not been in a Nazi concentration camp, had she not seen her family rescuing those Jewish people from the Nazis, she never would have had the witness and the impact that she's had in our world. Don't assume that because things aren't going the way you want them to go, that God has in any way forsaken you or left you or forgotten about you. In verse 15, Paul switched gears just a little bit real quickly. I want to finish up here. He says it's true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry or jealousy here, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so in love, knowing that I'm put here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I'm in prison. See, while Paul was in prison, there were some other preachers that thought we could take advantage of this. Paul's been the famous guy up until now. Now, while he's in prison, we can be the famous ones. We can get the crowds. We can get more of the attention. And Paul said, you know what? Because I understand my purpose, I don't care. If Christ is being preached and the gospel is being advanced, it just doesn't matter if they're doing it for their own glory or not. I hear all these different church members and preachers tearing down and criticizing other preachers and other churches all the time. Oh, they're not real. They're not sincere. They don't really hold true to the gospel. Friends, if Jesus Christ is being promoted and the gospel is being advanced, I don't care. We're not in competition with any of them. We're all in this together. And our purpose is simply to advance the gospel of Jesus. That's the only thing that matters. And if the gospel of Jesus is being advanced, let God use whoever, wherever, whenever. It doesn't matter. We don't have to get credit. We don't have to say we do more than they do or they do more than us. That just doesn't matter if the gospel of Christ is being advanced. That's why he went on to say in verse 18, this doesn't matter. The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached, and because of that, I rejoice. Look back at verse 16. Let's pick up there. He says, I am put here in prison, in chains, for the defense of the gospel. That phrase, I am put here, is a military phrase. It indicates a military assignment. He says, God assigned me to this duty of being chained to this guard. It's a military assignment. He's saying, I'm stationed here on purpose. You know, in the military, you don't always get to pick where you're going to be stationed. They send you where they want you. Now, you may have a little influence from time to time, but basically they get to decide where you go and the conditions you go under within our service for Christ. Wherever you find yourself right now, you need to look at it this way. This is where He's stationed me right now. Right now, that might change in the future, but right now, this is where He has me stationed. So I need to serve Him right here. Under these conditions, with these people, in this marriage, in this workplace, in this community, in this neighborhood, this is where I'm stationed right now for the cause of advancing the gospel of Jesus Christ. So Paul's writing these words, and I'm sure as he's writing this letter, remember, he's chained to a guard, a different one every 6 to 8 hours. Now, when you're sitting there with somebody as a guard that you're chained to, and you know they're kind of on death row, they don't know if they're going to live or die, wouldn't you want to know what they're thinking? Wouldn't you want to know, what's going on in their mind? I'll bet as Paul is writing, he's jerking that chain a little bit, right? And he's writing. I bet the guards, you know how when you're sitting on an airplane and somebody's got their tablet out or something, or a book that they're reading, sometimes you look over, right? You see what they're looking at, or you see what they're reading. I bet they're looking over Paul's shoulder, every guard that he had, and said, let's see what he's writing about. Let's see what he's talking. Here he is in prison. Here he is not knowing if he's going to live or die. What is Paul writing about? What does a person do who's on death row? What do they say? What do they think about? And they look over his shoulder and they read verse 20. I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage so that now, as always, Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. And verse 21, that's the verse, remember? For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If I live, I'll do it to glorify Christ. If I die, I'm going to die in such a way that I do what? Glorify Christ. Either way, the gospel of Jesus Christ is being advanced. In verse 22, if I am to go on living in the body, this will mean fruitful labor for me. In other words, I'll be able to make more of a difference here. Yet what shall I choose? I don't know. I'm torn between the two. I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is better by far, but it's far more necessary for you that I remain in the body. So you're just going back and forth. But one thing is clear. The purpose of Paul's life wasn't Paul, was it? The purpose of Paul's life is Christ. To advance Christ and His gospel. I was thinking this week it would have been easy for him to question God through all of this. But God was using it in greater ways than he could ever imagine. So I want to close with this last one. Paul brings it to kind of a conclusion on this discussion that he's having at the moment as he's writing the letter in verse 27. And he kind of just says, whatever happens, guys, in your life and mine, live worthy of the gospel. Whatever happens, just live worthy of the gospel. Look at verse 27. Whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, there's a lot I love about Paul's writings, but there's some parts that I don't really like. One of the things about Paul's writings that I don't really like is he cuts out all the loopholes. Right? Don't we look for loopholes a lot of times? Yeah, honor Christ as long as this is happening, as long as things are going the way you want them to go, as long as your life's working out the way you wanted it to work out. Yes, honor Christ then. I wouldn't mind Christ telling me that. I wouldn't mind Paul writing that. But Paul writes, whatever happens, you just keep living for Christ. You keep honoring Christ. You keep advancing the gospel. Whatever happens. Yeah, but God, what if someone pulls out in front of me today in traffic? Live a life worthy of the gospel. Yeah, but what if my coach doesn't play my child the way I want him to be played, right? I want him to be the quarterback and he's not putting them there. Whatever happens, live a life worthy of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Yeah, but what if my child frustrates me, gets on my nerves? Well, whatever happens, live a life worthy of the gospel of Jesus Christ. What if my boss overlooks me? What about that, God? Whatever happens, conduct yourself in a manner worthy of the gospel. Well, what if the ump makes a bad call? What if my team loses? What if the boss calls me into his office and tells me that we're downsizing? Whatever happens, right? What if my parents divorce? What if my spouse walks out on me? What if I lose my job? What if there's a terrorist attack? What if I'm diagnosed with cancer? Whatever happens, live a life worthy of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So as our praise team gets ready, let me ask you this. I want to ask you one more time. What's the purpose of your life? If you had to fill in that blank right now on your notes, I live for blank, what would you put there? Money, status, power, influence, comfort, fun. What do you live for? I got a better question. Who do you live for? Right now, who are you living your life for? Because we're called to live our life for Christ. Because it's only by living for Christ that we can advance the gospel. It's only when we, the current generation of the church, start living for Christ daily, that we will be willing to do whatever it takes to advance the gospel to the generations coming behind us. And friends, the survival of the church in America depends on this. Believe me, we've seen it in history over and over again. If we don't stop living for ourselves and we start living for Christ, the church is in danger of being eliminated in our country. The influence of Christ will go away. You talk about a bad culture right now. What if you take the influence of Christ out of that culture? What do you think it would be like then? So let me ask you right now. It's time. Maybe you didn't have it settled like you needed to when you came in here today, but today you can settle this. Today you can make a decision. You can choose that from this day forward, I am going to live for Christ. That is my purpose. My purpose is living for Christ in such a way that the gospel will be advanced through me, whatever happens. Whether I like it or not, I'm going to continue to honor Jesus Christ and advance the gospel of Jesus. Because if we learn anything from Paul, it's this. God is such an amazing, loving God that He can take the worst things in our lives and use them for the greatest things. We may not see it in our lifetime, but in eternity, we're going to be able to look back and say, oh God, I see now. When I was going through that rough time, but I held on, God, you used that. There are people that were touched by that and changed by that and influenced by that that never would have known salvation in Christ had I not held on through those times. But it begins with living with the right purpose, living for the right person, living for Jesus. As we stand and sing, we invite you to come.